The Italian game begins with the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4. At this point, black has a few options, but to play directly into the Italian game, they typically respond with bishop to c5. This is where our main discussion begins. For a dynamic and interesting approach, I suggest playing pawn to c3. The idea behind this move is to strengthen your control over the d4 square. By playing pawn to c3, you prepare to advance your pawn to d4 in the future or simply utilize the pawn's influence on the square. This small but significant change in the position offers you greater control and creates more opportunities for active play. It's possible you're also considering the b4 square. Perhaps in some lines, you might push the pawn to b4, which we will address later. For now, if black plays knight to f6, which is the best move, there isn't a significantly better alternative for them. At this point, we have two main options to consider. 1. Pawn to d4. This is the more dynamic and exciting choice. It opens the position and can lead to tactical opportunities. 2. Pawn to d3. This is the more solid and positional approach. Both moves are excellent and have been employed by some of the strongest players in the world. Choosing between them often depends on your personal style and the type of positions you find comfortable. Let's start by exploring pawn to d4. With this move, you immediately attack black's bishop and the central pawn. Black doesn't have many choices here. They must either capture your pawn or lose material. If they capture, we recapture with our pawn, creating a strong central structure with two pawns firmly established in the center. This is an appealing setup that gives you greater control over the board and opens up more active possibilities for your pieces. If black makes a mistake, for example, by playing bishop to b6, a move that a fair number of players might choose, you are left with two pawns in the center, a very strong and advantageous position. From here, you could even consider advancing one of these pawns on your next turn, creating significant problems for black's knights. Both knights may be forced into awkward positions as they struggle to find good squares. However, in most cases, black knows the correct response and plays bishop to b4, delivering a check. This introduces the first major decision you'll face in this pawn to d4 line. How do you block the check? Blocking with knight to c3. This is the more dynamic and fun option. Blocking with bishop to d2. This is considered a more solid choice, but it's not without its drawbacks. Let's first examine bishop to d2, as it won't take long to explain. While this move is arguably the best from a purely theoretical perspective, I don't recommend it. The main problem arises if black responds with knight takes pawn on e4. You'll then need to trade bishops on b4, and this opens the door for a tactical sequence. Play bishop takes f7, delivering a check. After the king recaptures, follow up with queen to b3 check, attacking both the king and the unprotected knight on b4. This tactic allows you to recover your material and regain the initiative. While this line is playable, it's generally not the most practical approach for maximizing your position. This sequence ensures that you won't be down any material, and it also forces black's king onto an awkward square where it cannot castle. Afterward, we can play knight to e5, delivering a check. Black's best response is king to e6, and we then retreat the knight. At first glance, this position might seem favorable for white. Our queen is active on a strong square. Material is equal, and black's king is awkwardly placed on e6. However, this position is completely even. The key reason lies in black's next move, queen to f8. This creates two major threats, a potential queen trade, the threat to capture the pawn on f2. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to guard the f2 square without trading queens. If we proceed with the queen trade, black recaptures, and while the game can continue from here, this position is very difficult to win. Although it's slightly better for white according to theory, I would argue that black's winning chances might even be higher, due to our isolated central pawn on d4, which becomes a long-term target for black. As for black's king on e6, it might appear to be a weakness, but in reality, it's not. White has no practical way to attack the king, and it can remain safely on d6 or even move to freeing the bishop to develop later. This makes black's position quite stable and resilient despite the initially awkward king placement. Let's rewind to the position where black gives the check. If you block the check with the bishop, black can force a very balanced and unexciting line. But if you want better winning chances, a more dynamic position, and some fun tactical opportunities, I recommend blocking with knight to c3 instead. Now, there's one primary move black will usually play. They'll capture your pawn on e4 because it's available. At this point, you can simply castle kingside. By castling, you activate your rook and create threats like rook to e1 if black isn't careful. Additionally, their knight on e4 is now hanging, as you've removed the pin on your knight. Black will most likely capture on c3, but the critical question is how they capture. Let's quickly examine both options. Knight takes on c3. This is the less effective response from black. After knight takes on c3, you recapture with your pawn. Most of the time, black will then capture the pawn on c3, considering it a free pawn. Here's where you spring your tactic. Play queen to b3. This move creates a double attack, targeting both black's hanging rook on c3 and their pawn on f7. The vast majority of players will instinctively capture the rook on a1, but this is a mistake. It allows you to exploit their position tactically. We start by capturing the pawn on f7 with check. If black moves their king to f8, or if they move to e7, we bring the rook to e1, forcing the king back to f8. Once the king is on f8, we play bishop to g5, trapping black's queen. The only way for black to save the queen is to play knight to e7, but we follow up with knight to e5, setting up a powerful attacking idea. Our next move will be bishop to g6, threatening checkmate on f7 with the combined attack of our knight and bishop. At this point, most players respond with bishop takes pawn on d4 to eliminate the threat. In this resulting position, but white is completely winning. We continue with bishop to g6, and the only way for black to delay checkmate is to play pawn to d5 to block. From here, we bring our queen into the attack. For example, moving the queen over to target the king. Black will be forced to block the check with their knight, but this exposes their queen, leaving it hanging and sealing their fate. If black blocks with the bishop, we simply capture it. If they recapture, their queen on d8 is still hanging. While they might gain our bishop in the exchange, they are unable to move their knight, which remains a significant issue for them. Alternatively, black may choose to capture our knight instead. In this case, we respond with bishop to e6, delivering a check. At this point, if black moves their king, we have queen to f7, which is checkmate. To avoid this, black is forced to block. They will most likely block with the bishop, although blocking with the knight is also possible. However, if they block with the knight, they lose their queen, as we simply capture it. If they block with the bishop and recapture after we take, we follow up by bringing our queen to a decisive attacking square. From here, we threaten checkmate on f7. Black has no good options to defend. If black tries to escape by running with their king, we simply capture the pawn, renewing the checkmating threat. Additionally, the rook on h8 is now hanging, leaving black's position completely lost. This sequence demonstrates how our attack quickly becomes overwhelming, leaving black with no viable defensive options and resulting in a decisive win for white. Let's go back and examine this position step by step. After black captures the pawn e4, we castle. While this sequence isn't forced, it is by far the most popular continuation. And many players enjoy the dynamic nature of knight to c3, which leads to exciting positions and excellent winning chances. However, if black has studied this line and knows what they're doing, they will likely capture with the bishop instead of the knight. In this case, the tricks we saw earlier don't apply, and we simply recapture the bishop. Black will probably respond with knight takes on c3, but here we have queen to e1, delivering a check and forking their king and knight. This is a favorable outcome for us.